Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and today we're talking about AI storytelling and how to use these tools in ways that can help you amplify your story, but without being a boring, mindless drone. To carry on this conversation, we have Matt Banker. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian.
Now, your background, part of it, is in teaching people and implementing the StoryBrand framework, which for folks who don't know, Donald Miller wrote this book and has this company called StoryBrand. And a lot of the websites you've read that really resonated with you use this framework for talking about stuff, but it's really a framework for getting across your story. And now we have these tools that promise to go tell our story for us. And it bears some investigation about how to use the tools to really tell your story better, but also to still retain your story in a way that's not easily copyable, which is totally a word. Matt, what's your take on how someone, let's say a six-figure entrepreneur, should be using the AI tools we have today?
Okay, well, I'm going to go back just a little bit before I answer that question because I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, hopefully in a good way. You mentioned how we're always trying to figure out how to tell our stories better and be more interesting. Where I'd stop and just take a second is to say, the most important thing, if you are an entrepreneur, if you have clients or customers, is not actually that you can tell an interesting story about yourself, but that you understand the story that your clients or your customers are experiencing or the one that they're living and how you can enter into their story. So it's this slight shift, but what I've really found is that this is part of the StoryBrand framework is you really want to be the guide and you want to make your customer the hero. But a lot of times, this is one of the big mistakes that founders and entrepreneurs make is they think the reason no one's paying attention to me is that they don't see how interesting I am. And really what the problem is, the reason they're not paying attention to you is that they don't think that you are interested in them enough. The story that you're telling doesn't include them enough. So they're not engaging with it. So that's where I'm going to start. And then I'm happy to take a follow-up, but I'll talk about AI after that.
That's a great place to start. It's one of the highlights of what Donald Miller teaches is that really communicating yourself is not the most important person in the room. The problem I see that at this point, a vast number of people have read Donald's stuff.
Yes.
They understand that working with StoryBrand experts to go build websites is probably a high ROI activity. And so they search out people like you. But these tools are showing up. And we're recording this, by the way, March 27th, 2022, because in AI land, the day a conversation happens matters. And the same conversation might sound irrelevant. Hilarious.
Yes.
So we say, okay, we're going to tell a story about the client. But now we have these tools where we can say something very specific. Tell me about this exact kind of firm with these exact kind of details. And an AI can research more than we ever could on our own and gather for us everything. And then we can say, tell me a story about, or what are the main person's needs? I was just working with Google Bard, Google's newest AI tool. And I was asking it, I have it pulled up my other screen. I was asking about one of my kinds of clients for one of my companies where I teach lenders how to make better loans. And I asked it questions like, what makes a loan officer great at their job? And they gave me 5 bullet points with a sentence or 2 each, and all this marketing copy that I could just slap into an email or a website and say, hey, my business helps you do thing X. The first thing on the list is knowledge of the lending process. And it's not wrong, except it doesn't have the soul to it, which is why this company's been successful since the late 70s. It doesn't have the human touch behind it. How do we keep the human touch while using AI to go move faster?
I am very interested in what AI technology has to bring us. The most common one that people are talking about and thinking about right now is ChatGPT, using these large language learning models to generate content that sounds like people. Now, are you familiar with the uncanny valley where something's like,
oh yeah,
it's like almost good enough, but because it's not quite there, it's actually a little bit creepy?
Yep.
I think that there's a certain amount of that happening with AI generated content right now. And you mentioned, hey, this is March 27th, 2023. That might not be the case, with GPT-5 or, wherever we're going. So I don't want to make a blanket statement about what AI can and can't do. But right now, I do think that there's a little bit of a flatness with a lot of the content that is just generated directly from a lot of these AI tools. And so I do think it's important that you understand what your goal is when you're creating or when you're using a tool. I write a weekly newsletter. One of my focuses, I work with a lot of accounting firm owners, so I have a weekly newsletter about marketing for accounting firm owners. And part of the reason you write is not just to communicate information that you know to other people, but it's actually to figure out your own thinking about something. And so there's certain types of writing. If you're an entrepreneur and you are writing, there are some things that you need to do the writing because you need it, not because your clients need the information, but it helps you clarify your own thinking. So that's one piece of it. On the other hand, there's some pretty interesting things that AI tools can do. One way we've used it recently is you can take an article or an email or something and ask it to rewrite it with a different brand archetype in mind. So if your brand is more personable, maybe you want to say, hey, can you take this article and rewrite it from the everyman perspective? On the other hand, if your brand is trying to be a little bit more edgy, you might say, hey, write this from the outlaw brand archetype. And it just, it takes the same idea and it reworks it with some different language. It's not often, a perfect fit, but it's an interesting place to start to add some color to what you're doing.
That's interesting. I have a theory that we're going to see people like yourself eventually take how you approach things, like what you just said, and maybe you have your own, not just outlaw archetype, but the Matt Banker version of outlaw archetype. And then you'll be able to have, let's say, all your podcast appearances, all your emails, all your everything written together. And then someone will be able to subscribe to that and they'll say, okay, take this email content or this podcast transcript and apply the Matt Banker outlaw archetype and then show me 5 versions.
Yep.
But furthermore, you, being smart, will say, I want to go make more money doing this and have my name be more widespread. So you'll join a collective of other people that are similar-ish to you who will then be able to give advice. I think this is going to happen with email subject line tools, where eventually you'll be able to work with an AI that costs you $5.99 a month, and it will go take everything I've ever said on email subject lines, as well as all the client data that I make available to the tool, as well as 100 of my best friends who are also Keep certified partners. And then it will automatically give you, here's 5 suggestions, but it won't be based on large language learning models. It'll be based on 100 experts and their actual direct experience and their perspective on things.
Yeah.
And then at that point, what happens, Matt, when synthetic Matt Banker becomes better than Matt Banker at making guesses?
Well, hopefully in the process of being involved in that, I'll have monetized it and I'll be on a beach, in Bali or something like that. I won't need to be working, but
there we go. That's a plan.
We'll call that a hope. Hope is not a plan, is what I've heard from other people, but
that sounds right.
It's hard to know. I think of myself when it comes to marketing and marketing tools as an optimistic skeptic. I'm excited about where they can go. And there are areas where I'm skeptical. I'm always looking for opportunities and kind of trying to poke holes in whatever the most common thing is. I'm a StoryBrand guide. I've been doing this since 2017. I was very early in their certification program. And I love it. It's a great tool, but it's also not a template that can just be applied mindlessly. And so part of the thing that I love about finding great tools is poking holes a little bit and finding ways to use them that are a little more interesting or adapting them a little bit in different ways. And so these tools are obviously going to change the way that we work. And I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen yet. But the people that are going to benefit most from it are the ones that are able to still be creative in the way they leverage the tools. I'm a little bit skeptical that we'll have kind of an easy button, press play, let this chat GPT or this AI do your marketing for you. And part of that is we may move into a phase where there's a backlash. I was thinking about music recently, and you tend to see these cycles where it goes from kind of perfect to gritty, or you think of like the disco era or like rock operas where these big, magnificent, I won't say overproduced, but like very composed type of music. And then you might have punk that comes after that. And then you might have like 80s synth rock. And then if you think about the 90s, it's all about these like acoustic guitars. And there's this back and forth. And I have a feeling that there's going to be an element where AI generated content is going to be so ubiquitous that there'll be a bit of a backlash and people will be looking for the things that have And who knows what it is, because AI is going to be good at emulating this, but they're going to be looking for the most human stuff that they can find. And if I had to guess, the untapped frontier, or the frontier that is going to be most difficult for I think is going to be humor. AI is not very good at recognizing what is funny and why, at least right now. And so I do think that that human side of really being able to be fun and funny is going to be one of the areas where, at least for a while, who knows if it'll be forever, people are going to really continue to maybe dominate the space.
I just asked Bard as you're talking, I said, "Are you funny?" What Bard said back is, "I do not know if I am funny. I can generate text that is humorous, but I don't know if I can make people laugh. I can also understand and respond to humor in a way that is appropriate."
Mm-hmm.
It's a very AI answer, isn't it?
It is. Were you a Star Trek fan? I just think of Data. And those are some of the more interesting storylines, his attempt to kind of understand humor.
Yeah, I've now asked Bard, "Do you want to be funny?" Bard says, "I do not have a strong desire to be funny. I am more interested in being helpful and informative. However, I do enjoy making people laugh, and I would like to be able to do so in a way that is appropriate and respectful." Now, for those out there, Bard is more focused on the productivity side of interacting with your Google apps as opposed to GPT-4.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not giving a totally fair comparison to other tools out there that launched, this week or last week. Okay, so one last question here. When do you think synthetic video will dominate over real video, over a video of a real person? Like, when will there be a synthetic map maker, or when will you start having your clients use the tools that are already out there, like Synthesia plus Overdub, to create synthetic videos that are based on your actual writing or slash podcast, but the video and the text are synthetic?
That is a good question. The first thing that comes to mind up until last week, we'll say, we think about social media, and the thing is, people want to connect with people. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. There's a reason that brands have a hard time gaining a lot of traction. I mean, honestly, actually, in any area except for humor, there's a few well known brands, big brands that do a great job with humor. But brands really struggle to build audiences that are interested in what they're doing because people want to connect with people. And I do think that one of the questions is going to be, AI can make cool stuff. The way it's going to flip, though, or when it's going to flip, is when the AI or the tool is indecipherable from a real human. I know that I get tons of LinkedIn messages from bots every day. It's very easy for me to recognize what they are, even if they're very well written. And I don't have any interest. A lot of times there's a person behind it who's trying to sell me something. But I think that as long as we're going to be able to, again, kind of that uncanny valley, when we recognize that this is a bot, it is going to turn us off from engaging with it to a certain extent. Now, I am not an AI expert, so I don't know when that's going to be in terms of those video things. I think that where that kind of video stuff is going to be used well is when we're able to be creative and funny and actually be obvious. Like, oh, this is obviously a bot or an AI tool, not trying to completely hide it, but it's not going to be able to replace that person to person connection that people still want. It'll be almost a separate category. At least this is my theory.
Did you ever read the 4 Hour Workweek?
Yes, I have.
Do you remember the part where Ferris says he hired an army of VAs to do his dating for him?
Mm.
And his VAs descended on the dating websites and including scheduling the dates. So Ferris would show up to these dates, and sometimes it worked great, and other times his date would start telling him, interacting with him as some story he told, and only after he's on the date in the conversation will he realize that his VAs were just making stuff up
Mm.
to go get these dates scheduled. And now Ferris is there, human to human, like, what do I do?
Right.
Because automating it through other humans, including humans from other cultures, it worked, but it didn't work.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to predict what AI can't do. I think that that is a little bit naive. Where I think we are is we're at an inflection point where something is happening and it's happening fast. I don't think we know exactly where it's going to go in the world. In my space, what I think is important is the world is changing, and the folks, both myself, my company, and my clients, I think that AI is something that does need to be engaged with now to be understood. And I think that it's important. I mean, your audience is entrepreneurs. I was at a conference last week and there was a guy talking about AI, and he said this, and I think it's so true. AI tools, this is not something to be figured out in 2024. This is a Q2 problem to be addressed. And not that you're going to know everything, but I think that if you just wait to see what happens, you are going to be behind the curve. I think some people are obviously going to make billions of dollars on AI tools. To be honest, I don't think that I'm going to be one of them. I don't have the background and the research to know them so deeply that's going to be me. But there are going to be other people who will make millions of dollars using AI tools to amplify the work that they're already doing and to be more efficient. And I think that lots of people have the potential to do that, but it's not going to be, hey, let's wait to see what happens and then jump on the bandwagon in 2024. This is something that I think if you're an entrepreneur, you need to be engaging with it now. You don't need to know how you're going to use it, but I think you need to start thinking about it.
Because your competition is starting to use it. And even if 9 out of 10 of them are flailing around like drunk monkeys, that the 1 in 10 who perhaps by accident figures out the way that resonates with your market, there might be some of these phase shifts happening shortly where suddenly your particular market you sell to really likes a particular way to use this tech.
Yes.
And you might not know it till after it happens. And it might be looking in your rearview mirror by a year or two going, wait a minute, I didn't do this thing starting back then. This is part of the plan of my podcast is I have, at this point, your episode 200 or so, I have a significant amount of episodes of this. And I also have hundreds of recordings from my mastermind group. Mm-hmm. And so at some point, I'll be able to have an AI listen to the whole podcast, listen to every time I was speaking during hundreds of mastermind episodes or mastermind conversations. And so you'll be able to ask it, here's a subject line, give me some alternative subject lines around the same vein.
Yeah.
Or here's an email, give me a subject line for the email. And synthetic Redbeard Brian will say, here's the thing. Because I'm creating vast amounts of, not vast really, I'm creating significant amounts of training data.
Yeah. Let me leave you with one practical use that you can use AI with right now. I think that is pretty powerful for anyone who's doing content or writing. I think that you can get to a different level of insight through conversation. This back and forth is really a helpful way for us to both understand what we're talking about and to get some deeper insights. And so what I would say is grab a transcription tool. I use a tool called Fathom, which joins me on my Zoom calls. But the other day, I joined a call with a client and I just talked with them for 10 minutes about a service that they offered. I asked clarifying questions. They explained what they do and how they work with their clients. And then I took that conversation and I just dropped it into ChatGPT and I said, take this conversation and write a 600-word article describing how this client delivers their services. It was able to recognize in the conversation that my client was the expert and I was the interviewer. It took out all the timestamps and everything, and it rewrote it in very legible or like understandable language. And I had a great 600-word article. Now, I got to send it back to my client to make sure that the accuracy is there because AI right now is not very accurate in a lot of cases. But, you know, you're leveraging the insight from the person right in front of you. It's not just searching the internet and getting, you know, the lowest common denominator, most common advice that it can find on the internet and spitting it out. It's coming from a person right in front of you, but it is an incredible streamline of the way that my process worked. I don't have to, you know, take my notes and write it out into an article afterwards. I get a great first draft, you know, in 3 minutes. So that's just one way to start and try it out. If you haven't been playing around with those tools yet, combine Fathom and ChatGPT into a content machine.
That sounds great. I've definitely seen Fathom around. I've not used it myself. And now I'm thinking if you had your voice synthesized by overdub, you could then say to ChatGPT, hey, make 10 quotes that are suitable length for Twitter from this article. Feed those 10 into, and by you, I mean you could have a VA do this. Feed those 10 into overdub to create 10 audios of you saying quotes from the article. Combine that with Synthesia to have a video avatar of you speaking the quotes. And then now suddenly, and maybe it's not quite as good as you saying things directly, but if it's 80% as good, but you can 10x the volume of your competition with good enough content, maybe not for heart surgery, but you know, for marketing, for accounting, you're like, if it's 80% good enough, and your new content 10 times as often as your competition, you can just appear much bigger than you are.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it, your competition will, which is a fascinating part of this current moment in history.
There's thresholds that you have to reach. We're not creating art, we're creating marketing material. You have to reach a threshold of professionalism and quality design and good writing and those sorts of things. But there is a point where there are diminishing returns, where more energy to create, like you said, the 100% version instead of the 80% version. There's just not much to be gained there. And so having these systems make it easier for you to create those 80% versions, it's going to be a huge advantage, I think, to the people that are able to do that.
My brain's spinning, Matt. Thank you for your time being on the show today. For folks who want to go learn more about you, about StoryBrand, about how you help firms kick more butt online, where should they go?
Well, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so come find me, Matt Banker, on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website. We primarily build websites for small businesses and six-figure entrepreneurs, and you can find me at bankercreative.com.
Great, Matt. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.